5, Shannon. Time for chapter 10. Thanks ever so much in IOP for a double shout out from you, so I'm shouting back at you. Okay, ready for chapter 10 then? Chapter 10, Revenge is Sweet. All this while in Nottingham Castle, Sir Guy of Gisborne and the Abbess of Kirkley had been searching for some sure way of destroying Robin Hood and the outlaws, but neither plotting nor prayers had come up with anything. Many of their own spies had themselves deserted and joined the outlaw band. Bribery proved fruitless too. They had doubled the price on Robin's head, but no one came forward. As for the sheriff, he sat glowering in his castle, terrified of every creaking door and seeing devils and portents in every flitting bat or screech owl. The three of them huddled close to the fire that Christmas night, the wind whining and moaning in the chimney. All of them were brooding darkly about the same thing, the same man. Yet another Christmas had come and gone, and Robin Hood still lived. In his fury and frustration, Sir Guy of Gisborne kicked out at a sprig of holly and sent it flying into the red heat of the fire, where it crackled, roared, and then vanished in a shower of sparks up the chimney. Behind them, his eyes shining in the darkness at the back of the room, stood a servant holding a ewer of wine, a trusted servant, but unknown to them, an outlaw and a spy. "Numbskulls," said the abbess suddenly. "We have been numbskulls. May I burn in hellfire if I have not found the perfect way. We'll smoke them out, brother. We'll burn Sherwood round their ears. Burn it to the ground so there's nowhere left for them to hide." "But you can't," the sheriff protested. "It's the king's forest." "The king, dear brother, is hundreds of miles away in Austrian dungeon, is he not? For God's sake, he's very probably dead and buried by now. And besides, brother, you speak for the king in Nottingham, so you are the king in Nottingham." "It could work," said Sir Guy of Gisborne, springing to his feet. "It really could work. We wait for a wind from the west. We have all our men, every one of them, ready and waiting on the east side of the forest. We light the fire and the rats will run straight into our trap. It's so simple, so beautiful." All through the night of New Year's Eve, the sheriff's men lay in wait in their hundreds along the eastern edge of Sherwood. Every quiver full, every sword and spear and axe sharpened for the kill. Hidden in the woods behind them, the horsemen waited and watched. Nothing had been left to chance. Not a single outlaw was to be left alive. In the grey dark of dawn, with just a dozen men to help them, the sheriff and Sir Guy rode out of Nottingham, torches in hand. The wind was perfect, gusting from the west, and the forest was dry from weeks of frost. It would burn like a sprig of holly. They timed it to the minute, reaching the forest just as the dawn was breaking. "We have him now," said the sheriff, riding forward with his blazing torch. As he spoke, a shadow moved and stepped from the trees. "Drop the torch, my lord," the shadow spoke, and became Robin Hood. "I have an arrow pointing at your heart, Lord Sheriff." The sheriff did not hesitate for a moment, but threw down the torch at Robin's feet. Then there were other shadows flitting through the trees, dozens of them, hundreds of them. All the sheriff's men but one threw down their torches at once. With a scream of rage, Sir Guy of Gisborne charged his horse towards the nearest tree. He threw himself flat along the neck of his horse, the torch thrust ahead of him like a lance. Robin wheeled round as he passed and let loose his arrow. It took Sir Guy of Gisborne through the neck and lifted him clean from the saddle. He was dead before he hit the ground. When the body was still at last, the sheriff looked up. The man standing before him was not dressed like Robin and the others in Lincoln green. His red cloak bore on it the crest of 3 golden lions rampant, the arms of the King of England, of King Richard the Lionheart. He recognised the face now, and from that moment he knew he was going to die. He was hauled unceremoniously from his horse and thrown down before the king. "Have mercy, sire," he begged, grasping the king's feet. "Once before you were shown mercy," said the king. "Never again. These last few days I have lived with the outlaws. I have heard each of their stories. I go to fight a holy war for God and country, and while I'm gone, men like you play the petty tyrant. You thieve from the people, you pillage, you corrupt, and you do it in my name too. You are going to burn down my forest and massacre these brave people, so despised by you, so maltreated. The holy book says, ye reap what ye sow. Within the hour you shall hang by the neck like the common criminal you are, not a man, not a woman, not a child in this company, nor in this world, I think, will mourn your death. Take him to the gibbet. Much, the miller's son, stepped forward. It was promised to me, sire, he said. Robin Hood promised me his death. Then he is yours, replied the king. The king and the outlaws stood at the edge of Sherwood and watched as Much led the whimpering sheriff away, down into the valley where the gibbet stood waiting. Suddenly the sky darkened overhead, as from all over Sherwood, it seemed, the crows gathered. Anything, pleaded the sheriff. Anything you want, please let me live, please. I have gold, more gold than the king himself. Much made no reply to this, or to any of the others of his entreaties, but fixed the rope quickly about his neck and hanged him high. Only when he was dead, with his legs swinging in the wind, did Much speak at last. For my father, he said. As the outlaws passed the gibbet on their way to Nottingham that morning, every one of them looked their last on the hated sheriff of Nottingham, and terrible though the sight was, it stirred no pity in their hearts. When the people of the city came out to greet their king, and the outlaws were cheered all through the streets, from every doorstep, from every window, they could not help but feel sad that at that moment of their greatest triumph, a golden time of great comradeship was coming to an end, that nothing would ever be quite the same again. But spirits rose again that night as they all feasted together in the great hall of the castle, Robin and Marion on either side of King Richard. Friar Tuck blessed the venison and then ate most of it himself. Much wrestled against all comers and won every time, as everyone knew he would. Blondel sang for them, and as the castle rang to the sweet sound of the candlelight song, the people in the streets of Nottingham outside it heard and danced with joy. For them, as well as the outlaws, the cruel days, the dark days, were over at last. Out in the moonlit countryside, far beyond the city walls, there was no such happiness. The sound of the distant revelry was a bitter accompaniment to the Abbess of Kirkley as she cut down the sheriff from the gibbet, with her sisters laid him alongside Sir Guy of Gisborne in a cart. The sheriff's army had simply drifted away and vanished. She had no hope left, only hate. She lifted her face to the full moon. "Hear me, Robin Hood," she screeched. "For what you have done you shall pay with your life. Here lies my brother, and with him the only man I have loved on this earth. For their deaths you will die, I swear it." That same night the two men were buried at Kirkley in the abbey graveyard, and even as the sisters were filling in their graves, the abbess was upstairs in her room praying, and when she prayed now it was not to God but to the devil. "Deliver me up, Robin Hood," she hissed. I am yours for life." The king did not stay long in Nottingham, but long enough to decree that all the outlaws should live and work where they pleased, like other men and women, that all the property, houses, lands, goods and chattels should be restored to their rightful owners, and proper restitution made for the sheriff's own fortune. "And lastly," he declared, "I decree that in recognition of their courageous resistance to the recent tyrannies, Robin Hood and his outlaws shall be able to hunt through the royal forest of Sherwood for the rest of their lives." There was much rapturous cheering at this and banging of tables, but the king had not finished. "However," he went on, "for this consideration I want to borrow your leader, only for a while. I want Robin Hood to act as counsellor to me when I return to London. I have much need of men about me that I can trust. Well, Robin, will you come?" Robin was flattered, but he did not want to go. Home had always been the forest. He wanted nothing else, to be nowhere else. He and Marion had always dreamed of living and farming on the edge of Sherwood, in the same house, the same land where he had grown up as a boy. But the king had asked him, and he could not refuse. "I come with my friends and my family, sire, or not at all," he said. "Agreed," replied the king, and the two men embraced. But the hall had fallen stonily silent. "No!" cried one of the outlaws. "Stay with us, Robin!" And the cry echoed around the hall, and the outlaws were all on their feet in protest. Robin did all he could to appease them. "I'll be back," he said. "As Tuck would say it, by God's good grace, I'll be back." But the joy had suddenly gone out of the feast. "How could I say no to him?" said Robin later, when he and Marian were alone. "You could not," she replied, "but how I wish he had not asked." So it was with heavy hearts that they left the next day for London, Robin alongside the king, little Martin on his saddle clinging to the pommel, and behind them Blondel and Much and Tuck and Little John and Marian leading his father. But as they rode through the marketplace, the outlaws surrounded them and would not let them past. Will Scarlet spoke up, as he had done all those years before when Robin had first met them. "May God keep you, good Robin," he said, "and may he bring you and yours back safe and sound." Will suddenly looked old and frail, and Robin then knew that he should not be leaving him, nor his outlaws, but there was no turning back. "Take care, Will," he said, and the crowd parted reluctantly and watched them leave, their eyes filled with tears. Robin had thought that in London he would pine for the open skies, for the trees, but he did not. He and his family lacked for nothing. They had the best food, servants, fine clothes, their house was warm. There were those at first who mocked their country ways and country talk, but never more than once. And when it was learnt who they were fated like royalty themselves. Marian saw at once that Robin was liking it far too much for his own good, but said nothing, hoping that the newness of it all would soon wear off. Unlike Robin, she longed for the simplicities of Sherwood. On the banks of the Thames, Robin and his father taught the king's bowmen how to split a wand at 100 paces, and Much saw to it that every soldier was fit in wind and limb, and he was a hard taskmaster. Little John busied himself in the king's armoury, but they saw little of him these days. As for Tuck, they hardly saw him at all. Time lay heavily on him, and he seemed to be spending most of his time in the taverns. The king called his council together each week, but Robin saw that there was little point in his being there. The king talked of nothing but his next crusade. Right, I've got to stop there, and we'll carry on tomorrow.